What if I told you one man quietly moved over $1 billion through a single account, and the government still refuses to let anyone see where that money went? Somewhere deep inside the Treasury Department sits a file so explosive, officials won't even admit what's in it. It's called the Epstein file, and the people who've seen pieces of it say it contains more than 4,000 wire transfers, each one a potential clue to how one of the darkest operations of modern times really worked. This isn't rumor, it's documented money movement. Yet somehow the full picture has never been released, and the question that has lawmakers, investigators, and journalists whispering the same thing is simple: what are they hiding and why?
Mr. President, Donald Trump has made some far-fetched statements over the last few months, but a stunner in the last few days was his claim that the Jeffrey Epstein matter was a hoax and a scam. Here is why the president is wrong. The figure at the center of this story was an ultra-rich, well-connected sex trafficker. He was a serial rapist of women and young girls. And for some reason, the Trump administration, that claimed they'd be the most transparent administration ever, turned on a dime. The president had run on a campaign with a promise to expose the Epstein files. Now he and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, say, nope, nothing to investigate. When it comes to Epstein and sex trafficking, all these claims are just ludicrous. I want the American people to know that that's wrong. If you want to know why, just look at the latest report from our investigators that was discussed in the New York Times this morning. Now, somewhere in the Treasury Department, Mr. President, locked away in a cabinet drawer, is a big Epstein file that's full of actionable information. Follow the money details about his financing and operations that await investigation. Last year, the Biden administration allowed our investigators to look at portions of the file. We did that at the Treasury building. Here is what it says. Treasury's Epstein file details, Mr. President, 4,725 wire transfers. Let me repeat that. 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to nearly $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts. If you ask me, that is more than 4,000 potential lines of investigation right there. Hundreds of millions more flowed through other accounts. That's even a lot more to investigate. The file shows that Mr. Epstein used multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, to process payments related to sex trafficking. A lot of the women and girls he targeted came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and elsewhere. One shudders to think about the kinds of people who must have been involved in trafficking these women and young girls out of those companies and into the Epstein web of abuse. Again, these are all potential leads, Mr. President, the Department of Justice ought to be digging into. This is about years and years of international sex trafficking. None of this is a hoax. None of it is a scam. And I'd like to say I consider it insulting to the intelligence of the American people for the Trump administration to simply say there is nothing to investigate here. Now, when the Trump administration came in with a lot of fanfare about transparency and openness, I said, I'm going to follow up on that. So I wrote to the Attorney General, Ms. Bondi, Treasury Secretary Bessent, FBI Director Patel, and I asked them all to produce the Epstein file to the Senate Finance Committee so it could be reviewed. In fact, I've made that request multiple times. The Trump commitment to transparency based on the response didn't mean a whole lot because they just refused. Here's what one Treasury official wrote back to me. I'll quote here. The Department of Treasury has previously made documents available relating to the matter in response to your inquiries. Accordingly, we understand that you have the information you seek from the Treasury related to this request. We thank you for your attention to this important issue. Mr. President, for anybody who's familiar with how these discussions go in Washington, D.C., what I just read was code for the bureaucracy saying, you're asking for information, go pound sand. The Trump administration may be trying to close the books on the Epstein sex trafficking, but I want it understood as a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, where we spend a lot of time looking at where substantial sums of money are going, particularly if they may be promoting wrongdoing and helping to evade taxes. We are going to stay on this fight to hold the wealthy individuals accountable for the harm that they clearly were involved in injuring the young women and others in this sex trafficking. So I'm going to have more follow-up for Attorney General Bondi very quickly. As for today, Mr. President, if she doesn't want to do the investigating, doesn't want the DOJ to do it, let me just restate my original demand. Have that Treasury
When a senator stood on the Senate floor and read those numbers out loud, 4,725 transfers totaling nearly $1.1 billion, the room fell silent. He wasn't reading from speculation, he was quoting the Treasury Department's own files. One account, one man, one network of unimaginable reach. The kind that can touch foreign banks, private jets, and secret islands without leaving a fingerprint except in the money. But the money tells a story. Each transaction a breadcrumb leading from hidden accounts in the Caribbean to sanctioned banks in Russia and even into corporate fronts that appeared overnight and vanished just as fast. Behind every transfer lies a possible accomplice, a facilitator or a gatekeeper who helped a predator move his empire in plain sight. And yet every time investigators ask for the full file, the answer comes back the same, already provided. Nothing more to see. But everyone knows that's a bureaucratic code for go away. The senator who demanded those records wasn't buying it. He'd been investigating financial crimes for decades and knew exactly what those polite refusals meant. In Washington, when a department says you already have what you need, it usually means they've found something you shouldn't see. And this time that something involved an international trafficking operation that shattered countless lives. Epstein's crimes were well known, but what's still hidden are the enablers, the banks that looked the other way, the accountants who processed the payments, the executives who knew exactly who was being paid and for what. Somewhere in those 4,725 transfers are the names of the people who helped him do it. But instead of opening the files, key officials shut the doors. They said the matter was closed, that there was no need for further investigation. The senator called that statement insulting to the intelligence of the American people, because nothing about 4,000 unexplained transfers tied to a global trafficker says case closed. In one part of the Treasury file, investigators noticed several transactions routed through banks that are now under sanctions for money laundering and organized crime. Those banks handled payments from accounts linked to Russia, Belarus, and Turkey, the same regions where many of Epstein's victims were recruited. The pattern was unmistakable. Money moved from those areas into Epstein's accounts, often disguised as consulting fees, trust distributions, or charitable grants. Each payment might look ordinary on paper, but together they formed a map of exploitation, Behind every line of digits was a person, someone coerced, manipulated, or sold. That's what makes this file so disturbing. It's not just numbers, it's evidence of lives destroyed for profit. And still, requests for the full file were ignored. Letters sent to the Attorney General, the Treasury Secretary, and the FBI Director all came back with carefully worded denials. The senator even offered to review the records under supervision in a secure room. The answer remained no. When one Treasury official finally replied, their letter ended with, "We thank you for your attention to this important issue." Polite, dismissive, final. In Washington, that phrase translates to "you're not getting it." So why the secrecy? Why block a congressional investigation into a criminal network that operated across borders? Some insiders say it's because those records don't just name Epstein, they connect to institutions too big to embarrass. Others believe they reveal payments to individuals still in power. And while those claims remain unverified, the pattern of silence speaks volumes. It's not the first time officials looked away. Years before, when Epstein's crimes were exposed in Florida, the state's attorney general had every reason and every opportunity to pursue justice aggressively. But back then too, the system bent in his favor. Powerful friends intervened, charges were softened, and the trail went cold. The same attorney general would later rise to national prominence, promising transparency and justice, only to preside over another wall of secrecy. For survivors, that betrayal cut deep. These weren't abstract policy decisions, they were choices that allowed abusers to stay free and evidence to stay buried. And when that same official's office refused to cooperate with federal investigators years later, it felt like history repeating itself, protecting the powerful instead of the powerless. Inside the Department of Justice, whispers began. Some analysts quietly claimed that requests to dig deeper into Epstein's finances were met with sudden reassignment. Memos circulated instructing teams to deprioritize certain leads. Whether coincidence or coordination, the effect was the same: silence. The senator's frustration grew. On the Senate floor, he laid it out plainly. If the Justice Department won't act, then Congress must. His speech wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, each sentence carrying the weight of suppressed truth. He reminded everyone that this wasn't about politics. It was about accountability. The Treasury file wasn't optional reading, it was a roadmap to justice. He offered to help draft legislation giving Congress full authority to access those records. It wasn't grandstanding. It was desperation, the kind that comes after years of doors closing, emails ignored, and answers buried under red tape. And yet even after that, nothing changed. No subpoenas, no hearings, no new files released. The silence returned, louder than ever. The question then becomes, who benefits from keeping these documents hidden? Because when you follow the money, you follow power, and power hates sunlight. Those 4,725 wire transfers tell a story that someone doesn't want told. Some of them trace back to accounts owned by corporations with no employees and no offices, existing only on paper. Others show round-trip payments, money sent out and then back again from offshore entities, a classic laundering pattern. It's the same tactic used by organized crime to clean profits, only this time, the profits came from the exploitation of human lives. Even now, rumors circulate that pieces of the file have leaked among investigative journalists. Reports claim some of those records point to hedge funds, private equity firms, and even charitable organizations that received unexplained payments from Epstein-linked accounts. None of it has been publicly confirmed. But the idea that such evidence could exist, locked away behind bureaucratic refusals, has infuriated the public. And it should. Because this isn't ancient history. These victims are still alive, some are still fighting legal battles, and while they fight, the government holds the documents that could finally expose the full network that enabled their abuse. For anyone who's ever wondered how one man could operate an empire of exploitation for decades, the answer is simple: he didn't do it alone. It takes enablers, bankers, lawyers, accountants, gatekeepers, all of whom needed one thing: silence. When the senator read those figures out loud, he shattered part of that silence. For a moment, the truth flickered through, but then the lights went out again. The Treasury insisted the investigation was over. The Justice Department refused to revisit the case. The former Attorney General stayed silent, and the files disappeared back into the drawer. Some officials have hinted that releasing the documents could compromise ongoing cases. Others claim it's about privacy or national security. But if that were true, there would be redacted releases, not total denial. The all-or-nothing secrecy points to something else: protection. Protection of reputations, protection of institutions, protection of donors and allies who might have crossed paths with the wrong name at the wrong time. That's why this story still matters. Because justice can't exist when information is treated like a political weapon. The survivors of this case aren't asking for vengeance, they're asking for truth. They're asking for the world to see what was ignored, minimized and covered up. And the only way that happens is if those files are opened. Every page, every transfer, every name. In the Senate chamber that day, you could hear the exhaustion in the senator's voice. "We've spent 3 years on this," he said, "and we're not stopping." It wasn't just determination, it was disbelief. Disbelief that a government built on accountability could look at $1 billion in suspicious transactions tied to human trafficking and say, "Nothing left to investigate." That disbelief should belong to all of us. Because if billion-dollar crimes can vanish behind bureaucracy, what hope is there for the rest of us? Think about that. A network that stretched across borders, involving sanctioned banks and shell companies, still hasn't been fully traced. The files exist, the evidence exists, but access doesn't, and as long as they remain sealed, the truth remains buried. It's easy for officials to dismiss questions by saying the investigation is closed. But investigations don't close themselves, people close them. Someone signs the paper, someone gives the order, and someone benefits from the silence. Even if only half the transactions in that file connect to criminal activity, that's still hundreds of millions of dollars linked to trafficking, exploitation, and abuse. Each line of data could identify a perpetrator or exonerate an innocent person. Transparency isn't optional, it's the least that justice demands. Behind the headlines, real people wait, victims who trusted the system and were told to be patient, families who believed the promise that justice would come in due time, and every day that file stays locked, those promises ring hollow. This is the uncomfortable truth: power protects itself, it always has, but history shows that truth eventually leaks through the cracks, documents surface, whistleblowers speak, files once thought destroyed find their way into daylight. And when that happens here, the question will no longer be what Epstein did, it will be who helped him, and why they were protected for so long. The senator called it unfinished justice. He's right, because as long as that Treasury file sits sealed away, there's a missing chapter in one of the most consequential criminal investigations of our time. And make no mistake, someone will read that chapter one day. Maybe it'll be a journalist, maybe another senator, or maybe it'll be you, watching this, demanding answers until the truth can't be ignored any longer. Justice doesn't vanish just because someone says the case is closed. It waits, it watches, it gathers strength from every person who refuses to look away. If those 4,725 transfers ever see the light of day, they won't just expose numbers, they'll expose a system that let wealth and influence silence. They'll reveal how easily power bends rules when no one is watching. And they'll remind us why oversight, transparency and persistence matter. Because at the end of the day, this story isn't about one predator, it's about how institutions fail when they forget who they serve. The victims of Epstein's crimes deserve more than sympathy, they deserve truth. They deserve to know that every person who moved his money, shielded his accounts, or turned a blind eye, will be held accountable. Until that happens, justice is only half done. So the next time someone calls this a closed case, remember, closed doesn't mean over, it means hidden. And hidden truths have a way of resurfacing when people demand to see them. The $1 billion, the foreign banks, the ignored warnings, none of it adds up unless there's something the powerful don't want exposed. And that's exactly why this story can't fade away. If you believe that no file should stay locked, no survivor silenced, and no system left unaccountable, make sure this story keeps spreading. Hit that like button, subscribe, share this video with someone who still believes justice matters. Because every view, every share, every voice adds pressure to open those files. Justice delayed is justice denied, and silence only protects the guilty. Let's make sure the truth finally gets out.